The day my husband's lawyer told me I'd be paying spousal support to a man who hadn't worked in 3 years, I didn't cry. I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that fills a room. The quiet kind. The kind that comes out when something is so absurd your body doesn't know what else to do. My lawyer touched my arm. "We'll fight it," she said. I nodded. But what I was thinking was, I should have seen this coming the moment he asked me to cover his mother's car payment. That was year 1. By year 4, I was running a tab I hadn't agreed to open. My name doesn't matter as much as the story. What matters is that I was 31. I owned a condo in Burnaby. I had a steady salary as a project coordinator at a mid-size engineering firm, and I had a 6-year-old daughter named Josie who drew horses on every piece of paper she could find. What also matters is that my husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, legally for 4 years, had not filed a tax return since we got married. I didn't know that until the end. That's the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. We met at a friend's wedding in Kelowna. He was charming in the way that men are charming when they want something, which I didn't understand yet. He had a plan, he said, a business idea, something in sustainable construction. He just needed the right moment, the right backing, the right environment to get it off the ground. I was 26 and I thought that sounded like ambition. My mother called it a red flag. I told her she was being ungenerous. We got engaged after 8 months. Married at a small ceremony in Okanagan the following spring. Josie came 14 months later, and I went back to work at 12 weeks because we needed my benefits. He stayed home with her. I told myself that was progressive. I told myself a lot of things. The first time I noticed money disappearing in a way that didn't make sense, Josie was 2. I was going through our joint account to track a reimbursement from work, and I saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $340 to an account I'd never seen. I asked him about it. He said it was for a course, professional development he called it, for the business he was still planning. I let it go. By the time Josie was 4, the transfers were larger and more frequent. I had stopped asking because the answers were always the same. The business, a contact, an opportunity. He started talking about a woman from his networking group. Alm was, all colleague because that's what he introduced her as. She was younger, he mentioned once, and very driven. I remember thinking that was an odd detail to volunteer. I found out the truth the way most people do, not through some dramatic confrontation, but through something small and accidental. I was looking for our car insurance documents on his laptop, and I saw a message thread that had nothing to do with networking. It had been going on for at least 8 months based on the timestamps, possibly longer. I sat there for a long time reading things I couldn't unread. I didn't say anything that night. I put the laptop back exactly where I found it. I made dinner. I helped Josie with her bath and read her 2 chapters of her horse book. After she fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen and I made a list. Not of feelings, I couldn't do feelings yet, but of facts. What I knew, what I could prove, what I needed to find out. What I found out over the next 2 weeks was worse than I expected. He had been using a secondary credit card, one I was technically a joint holder on but had never activated, to pay for things I hadn't known about. A nice dinner, concert tickets, a weekend at a resort in Whistler that I thought was a work trip he'd mentioned vaguely in passing. The total on that card was just over $11,000. The card I had no idea was being used, in my name. I also found out, through a conversation I shouldn't have heard, I had come home early from work and they were on a video call in the living room. Voices low but not low enough that she was pregnant. About 10 weeks, she said. She sounded nervous. He sounded like he was managing a problem. I walked back out the front door and sat in my car for 45 minutes. Then I called a family lawyer whose name I had gotten from a colleague 6 months earlier, half joking, the way you save a number you hope you never need. I was not joking now. My lawyer was direct and practical, which is exactly what I needed. We talked for an hour. She explained my options, my exposures, and the one detail that stopped my heart briefly. Because I was the primary earner and he had not been formally employed during our marriage, there was a real possibility I would owe him spousal support under BC family law. The amount would depend on duration of marriage, income difference, and what the court determined about his ability to become self-sufficient. She told me to get a full financial picture before I did anything else. I went home and I did exactly that. What I found in our finances took me 3 evenings to fully map. In 4 years of marriage, I had contributed just under $380,000 in income. Our shared expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, Josie's daycare, his family's various emergencies, had absorbed most of it. His mother's car payment I already mentioned. There was also a loan he'd given his brother that was never repaid. $2,000 here, $1,500 there. Money I hadn't explicitly agreed to but hadn't caught in time to stop. There was the business account he'd opened and closed without telling me, which had cycled through roughly $42,000 over 2 years. I couldn't account for all of it. The unauthorized credit card sat at $11,260. I printed everything. I organized it into folders. I gave my lawyer a copy of all of it. Then I went to the bank and separated my accounts. He noticed 2 days later. He came into the kitchen where I was making Josie's lunch, and he said, very carefully, that he'd seen the account changes, and he wanted to talk. I told him we could talk. I told him I also knew about her, and about the pregnancy, and about Whistler, and about the credit card. The careful tone disappeared. He said I was overreacting. He said the business account was complicated and I didn't understand how investment vehicles worked. He said the trip to Whistler was for a client meeting that had also happened to include her, which was a coincidence. I let him finish. Then I told him I had already spoken to a lawyer and I would be filing for divorce. I asked him to please not make this difficult for Josie's sake. He said if I filed, he would take her from me. I remember the exact quality of the silence after he said that. The refrigerator humming, Josie's cartoons playing down the hall, the sound of my own breathing. I said, "You're welcome to try." He moved in with his mother in Port Coquitlam 3 days later. I filed that week. What came next was a particular kind of exhausting that I don't think has a good word in English. It's not sadness and it's not anger, it's just weight. Constant, low-grade weight. Every email from his lawyer was another thing to respond to. Every document request was another evening at the kitchen table after Josie went to bed. I kept showing up to work and making sure my deliverables were clean because I could not afford, in any sense, to lose that job. His lawyer's first position was aggressive. He wanted the condo primary family residence, they argued, therefore subject to equal division. He wanted spousal support of $2,000 a month for 4 years. He also indicated he would be seeking expanded parenting time, meaning Josie would spend more time with him, which his lawyer framed as being in her best developmental interests. What it was actually about, my lawyer and I agreed, was the child support calculation. More parenting time meant less child support paid. His mother called me twice. The first time, she left a voicemail telling me I was breaking up the family and that I needed to think about what I was teaching Josie. The second time I answered because I thought it might be about Josie's pickup schedule, and she told me I had always been cold and difficult and that her son deserved someone more supportive. I told her I agreed he deserved someone else entirely and I wished them all the best. I hung up. She didn't call again. His colleague, the pregnant one, I did not hear from directly, but I heard about her through the proceedings because her situation became relevant to his financial claims. He had been supporting her, his lawyer argued, which was part of why his finances were in the state they were. The $42,000 business account, they suggested, was connected to supporting a person in a difficult situation. I let my lawyer respond to that. My lawyer had words for it. What I did, which I want to be honest about because I'm still not sure how I feel about it, was reach out to her once, not through lawyers, through a message, brief and carefully worded. I told her I wasn't her enemy. I told her I knew she was in a situation that was probably not what she expected it to be, and that if she needed information about him, about finances, about what he had actually represented to her, I was willing to share what I knew. I told her she didn't have to respond. She didn't respond for 3 weeks. When she did, it was one sentence. I think I need a lawyer too. I told her I thought that was probably right. What happened next, I found out later, through a source I'll keep vague because the details are not entirely mine to share. He had gone with her to a prenatal appointment. This was maybe 6 weeks after I filed. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. The dates didn't line up the way he had assumed they did. There was a conversation in the parking lot of the medical clinic in Coquitlam that apparently involved a great deal of raised voices. She called a friend afterward in tears. The friend was connected to someone who was connected, distantly, to someone I knew. The story I heard was that he had been so certain the baby was his that he had already told his entire family. His mother had apparently announced it at a dinner. The reversal was significant. I don't know all the details of what happened between them after that. I know they are no longer together. I know she applied for assistance, and I know she found a family support worker through a nonprofit in New Westminster who helped her get on her feet. I know those things because I made a phone call that I am not going to fully explain, except to say that I didn't do it for him and I didn't do it for me. I did it because she was 23 years old and she hadn't started any of this. His case fell apart fairly quickly after that. Without her pregnancy as a financial responsibility to argue, the support claims look different. My lawyer had also put together a comprehensive account of the unauthorized credit card use, which constituted financial misconduct under family property law in BC. The business account withdrawals, while harder to prove intent on, added to a picture that did not reflect well on him. We went to mediation instead of trial. He got less than his lawyer had originally demanded. Significantly less. The condo was divided according to what I had actually contributed in down payment and mortgage payments, with his share reflecting the portion of equity that was legitimately his. He did not get $2,000 a month in spousal support. He got a transitional amount for 1 year, time-limited and considerably smaller, because the mediator agreed he had the education and capacity to return to work. My lawyer had documented, carefully, that his not working had been a choice, not a circumstance. He had a degree. He had professional certifications. He had simply stopped using them. Josie's parenting schedule ended up at what my lawyer called a standard arrangement with primary residence with me. He sees her on alternating weekends and one weekday evening. She seems okay. She asks questions sometimes that are hard to answer, and I answer them as honestly as I can at a level she can understand. I tell her that her dad and I both love her and that sometimes grown-ups make choices that change how a family looks, but not how much a family loves their kids. She usually goes back to her drawing after that. Last week, she drew a horse with a blue ribbon. She said it won a race. The hardest part of the whole thing, harder than the legal process, harder than the financial reconstruction, harder than explaining to my own parents what had happened, was the period right in the middle where I didn't know how it would end. There were weeks where I sat at that kitchen table after Josie was asleep and I could not see clearly to the other side. I paid my lawyer, I paid my mortgage, I packed Josie's lunches, I showed up to my job, and I just kept going, not because I felt strong, but because stopping wasn't a viable option when someone was counting on me to keep the floor solid under her feet. My mother came to stay with me for 6 weeks during the mediation period. She slept in the spare room, and she made soup, and she watched Josie after school so I could take calls and review documents without interruption. She didn't say I told you so. Not once. I told her I had been wrong about what ambition looks like, and she said, "Now you know what it actually looks like. You've been showing me all year." I don't know what he's doing now. I know he moved out of his mother's place eventually. I've heard through the minimal necessary co-parenting communication that he has some kind of work, though I don't know what. I don't particularly want to know. What I care about is Josie's weekend drop-offs going smoothly and her being fed and safe and happy when she comes back. Most of the time, that part is okay. The condo is mine. I repainted the living room in February, a warm terracotta that Josie helped me pick from the paint chips, and I bought a new couch because I wanted one that didn't have his choices in it. Small things. But small things add up, in both directions, and I am learning to be more careful about which direction I let them accumulate. The unauthorized credit card debt was ruled his responsibility in the final agreement. I had it noted formally. That $11,260 is not mine to carry legally, and I put that in writing. I kept the coffee maker. He bought it actually, an expensive one, a whole argument in itself. But it makes very good coffee and Josie likes the sound it makes in the morning. She says it sounds like the house waking up. I'm keeping it for that reason specifically. There are things I would do differently. I would have looked at the finances sooner and more carefully. I would have asked harder questions earlier when the answers felt slippery. I would have listened to the part of me that kept noticing things and then deciding it wasn't worth the conflict to name them. That part was right. It was always right. I just kept overruling it in the name of keeping things smooth, and smooth is not the same as good. Smooth just means the problem hasn't surfaced yet. What I know now is what I knew somewhere in me for a long time, that keeping someone else afloat is not a problem if it's mutual, if it's chosen, if it's honest. The moment it stops being any of those things, it becomes something else. It becomes a system that runs on your silence. And silence, I have learned, is not a foundation. It's just the absence of the conversation you should have been having all along. Josie has a new horse drawing on the fridge. It has a name written underneath in her careful 6-year-old printing. She named it Steady. I think that's the right name. I keep coming back to the coffee maker. It's such a small thing to anchor a thought to, but that's where my mind goes when I try to make sense of all of it. He bought it. It makes good coffee. Josie likes the sound, so I kept it. And somehow that decision, that one quiet, practical, unbothered decision, feels like a summary of everything I had to learn. For a long time, I confused keeping the peace with keeping things honest. I thought if I didn't push back, if I smoothed things over, if I covered the gaps without making a scene, then I was being a good partner. What I was actually doing was making it easier for someone to take more than they were giving. There's a cost to that kind of silence, and it doesn't show up on one bill. It accumulates slowly, in a joint account you're not watching closely enough, in a credit card you didn't know was active, in a life that looks functional from the outside and is quietly draining you from the inside. What I understand now, and I wish I had understood it earlier, is that integrity in a relationship isn't just about being faithful or being kind. It's about being honest with your eyes open. It's about looking at what is actually in front of you instead of what you need to believe is there. I kept overruling my own instincts because naming the problem felt harder than living with it. That was a failure of judgment, not a failure of love. And the difference matters because one of those things I can actually learn from. The intelligence I mean isn't the kind you're born with. It's the kind you build by paying attention, by asking the questions that make you uncomfortable, by not deciding in advance that the answer will be fine. I had all the information I needed earlier than I realized. The transfers were there. The vague answers were there. The business that never produced anything was there. I just hadn't let myself add it up yet. And then there's what it takes to keep going once you do add it up. Sitting at that kitchen table at 11 at night after Josie was asleep, reviewing documents and printing bank records and responding to emails from lawyers, that wasn't strength in any dramatic sense. It was just deciding over and over that stopping wasn't an option. My daughter needed the floor to stay solid, so I kept putting one foot down and then the other. That's all resilience actually is, I think. It's not a feeling, it's a decision you make repeatedly in the absence of a feeling. What happened to my husband wasn't something I arranged or wished for. He made choices that narrowed his own options, and the consequences followed from those choices in a fairly straightforward way. He built something on a foundation that wasn't real, borrowed money, borrowed time, a whole future predicated on a pregnancy that turned out not to be his. When that fell through, there was nothing underneath it. That's not fate. That's just what happens when the thing holding your plan together was never solid to begin with. Josie named her horse Steady. She drew it herself and she printed the name underneath in careful letters, and she stuck it to the fridge with a strawberry magnet. She didn't know she was teaching me anything. But I'm going to try to be that for her. Steady. Not perfect, not fearless, just steady. Paying attention, doing the honest thing even when the easier thing is right there. Getting up every morning and making the coffee and being someone she can count on to still be standing. That turns out to be enough. Most days, it's more than enough.